And so welcome to Art 116. I wanted to do a quick kind of a encapsulation of chapter 8 with spatial relationships, exploring space a little bit to see how that can work with color theory in terms of creating the illusion of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional surface. So let's go to the screen share here and see where we can find it. There it is. Hit the share button. Yay, and we're here. So I got to move you guys around somehow, somewhat, so that we can see. I'm sorry, something horrible happened, and I have to go back to the beginning of my little presentation here. I have to try to move you guys carefully, pushing the right 2 buttons to make you guys go there. So in chapter 8, it's just a continuation of chapter 7. In creating depth in a composition. And so let's go and see what that's all about. I couldn't help myself. I had to quote, damn it, Shakespeare. I had to quote Star Trek here, Space, the Final Frontier. There's 2 kinds of perspective that we're going to concern ourselves with today. The first one is atmospheric perspective. That's the first big bullet point here. The second one would be linear perspective. And linear perspective lends itself to the built landscape of modern civilization. So when you've got building interiors, exteriors, cityscapes, roads, things that are way more geometric and that follow certain geometric design ideas, you can use linear perspective. It can be a really effective way of creating the illusion of 3 dimensions in space on a 2-dimensional surface. But first, we're going to talk about atmospheric perspective. This is used primarily in landscapes and the natural world. Landscape painters do this all the time. We're going to look at some of the great American landscape painters from the 19th century. This creates the illusion of depth using diminishing size of objects, overlapping of shapes. It also uses all the plastic color rules that we've been talking about. Objects that are in the foreground and are large also have bright colors, sharply defined. They have contrasting details, and all of that makes them advance towards the viewer. Whereas objects in the background are small, they have neutralized colors and fuzzy details, making them appear to recede into the background away from the viewer and opening up the illusion of 3-dimensional space. So what does that look like? Well, I got to move you guys again out of the way because, whoops, you guys are always in the way as I have to try to move it. Come on, you guys come up here. Damn it, stop it. All right, at least I'm getting better at running that button there. All right, so atmospheric perspective. I forgot the painter's name. Thomas Cole, famous Hudson Valley River School painter from the early to mid 19th century. And this is a famous, scene from, I guess I'm not going to be using this recording, am I? This is a famous scene from the Hudson River Valley, actually, I believe. And so probably near Mount Holyoke College these days. So you're up on top of a mountain looking down into the river valley and to the mountains in the distance. And so I'm going to try to very carefully point at stuff without advancing the frame. So in the foreground, we have sharply defined, detailed things that are a little bit contrastier. They have lighter lights, they have darker darks, and they have more full spectrum intensity, or what should be called chroma, full chroma intensity colors in the foreground. Even, where are we here? Even if those colors are just green and brown. The greens are brighter, the browns are brighter, and so forth. As we move into the middle ground here, we get a little bit less detail. It's not quite as sharply defined, and the colors, we tend to not get the really high key highlights or the really low key low lights in the middle ground. And so that tends to move the viewer's eye into the middle ground. As we plunge then into the background of the painting, we see that colors become even more neutralized. More neutralized colors are kind of closer together. They're grayed out to a great extent, so we don't have bright colors. We don't have really high key colors or really low key colors. They become much more grayed out. That's the oxbow down there. That's where the river takes a great big turn, almost 180 degrees on itself. And so that's the famous oxbow in the river. Then when you go way back to the mountains that are on the horizon, and in fact, when you go to the sky that's at the horizon line, that is very grayed out. There's very, very little color there. It's mostly just a blue-gray to gray color in the mountains on the horizon and in the sky that's just above that bright kind of horizon line right there that separates them. And so that's the idea of atmospheric perspective. It can really move you into an extreme sense of distance based on neutralizing color and moving towards very grayed out colors at the horizon. So now advance the thing. Okay, here's Albert Beardsdot coming west with lots of European American settlers in the middle of the 19th century to record these wonderful vistas and views for sale back in the East Coast, of course. This great, wonderful, untamed wilderness that were the Sierra Nevadas. And he does the same thing in this painting. We've got our foreground up here is grass and a herd of deer or elk, but they're mostly backlit because the light in this composition is actually in the background and it's coming towards us. So all we can see are these rims of light on the backs and the haunches of the deer here. Otherwise, the deer are in silhouette. But there's enough detail and there's enough highlights and lowlights in the foreground to give us sharper details in the foreground. We can see individual leaves and individual grasses and all that kind of stuff. And it's sharply focused and detailed and has highlights on it. As you move back into the middle ground, we're starting to lose those sharply focused details, highlights, and lowlights, and we get more into middle colors and middle values. And then as we move up into the mountains, we continue to get more and more neutralized, in this case, getting neutralized with white instead of just, getting neutralized with black or gray, until as we move up through the mountains and into the sky behind it, very neutral again. It's neutral on the high key side. It's kind of a warm neutral, but it's still super neutralized back there. Lots of golden light up there, but lots of white mixed in with the golden light to neutralize it quite a bit and kick it back into the extreme background. So basically that's how atmospheric perspective works. It's a trick of atmosphere. You're looking through a thick thing, atmosphere, and that tends to neutralize colors in the extreme distance. And that's something that, landscape artists recognized and developed as almost a science in terms of their observation nature. Other cultures did it too. Here's Utagawa Hiroshige, one of his 36 views of Mount Fuji. And so we see all of this sharply defined detail in the foreground, in the waves and the wave crests and all of the foam and everything. Don't do that. And then as we move into the background, we get increasingly more and more neutral until when you get to the slopes of Mount Fuji itself, it's very gray, very neutral, very somber, kind of just hanging there in the distance. The sacred mountain is in the distance there, one of the views of Mount Fuji, and the sky next to it is also very, very devoid, drained of color and just a very pale blue in the background. I'm going to skip this one and keep going here because I wanted to talk about linear perspective. We just covered atmospheric perspective. In a nutshell, that is what atmospheric perspective is. Linear perspective started to really get developed in the Italian Renaissance in Europe about 500 years ago. So before the Italian Renaissance, we had kind of a linear perspective. We understood that things, angled away from us. It was an intuitive linear perspective. And so here we've got a city, a view of a city, the allegory of good and bad government by Ambrosio Lorenzo. It's a fresco painting on a wall. And we can see all of the buildings. We can see the front facade of a building that is parallel to us and parallel to the picture plane. And we can see the sides of buildings moving away from us, and they are angled away from us. And so he gets that part of it. He gets that piece of it. But this isn't a super sophisticated understanding of linear perspective, and careful observation by both artists and scientists in the 15th and 16th century led us to something that's much more about almost a photographic realism in terms of linear perspective. And so linear perspective really talks about using certain conventions like the horizon line, determining and figuring out where the horizon line is in the painting. And so I'm going to move you guys, maybe if I'm lucky. Oops, no, because I can't. Not lucky enough. I got to get on you first and then do this and move you down there and release. Okay, so you guys are right down here with all of the patrons that are looking at the original fresco painting in the monastery where it was painted. It's painted in the lunchroom, in the monks' refectory dining hall. And so when they're eating their meal, they're looking up at the Last Supper with Jesus in the middle of it. So lots of religious paintings in the Renaissance. My apologies, but that's part of history. So that's how that worked. Linear perspective organizes space in terms of observation, and so we have the ground and we have the air, the sky divided by the horizon line. So when we look through the windows back here, we can see that there's actually a horizon that's even with our eye level and even with the eye level of all the apostles around the table, including Jesus. So that's our eye level. We're on the same level as all of them, looking straight in on the composition. One point linear perspective creates a vanishing point on the horizon line. And then if you've got an interior space like this, tries to organize all of the things that are supposed to be parallel to each other, like all of the tops of doorways or all of the tops of tapestries hanging on the wall or something that are understood to be at the same height and extending into the background, actually tend to converge towards that point on the horizon line. And this coffered ceiling detail up here, this is something that goes back to Roman architecture, the idea of crisscrossing ceiling beams with negative spaces between them that are kind of like rectangular or square spaces. They were called coffers. It's kind of where we get the idea of coffin today, comes from coffers in the architecture going back to ancient Rome. So they, of course, are laid out on a grid system, and the grids, they're understood to be parallel towards to each other. But as they recede from us, they tend to converge towards a point on the horizon line. So artists started to construct their paintings based on the rules of linear perspective as they were being laid down and explained by scientists and artists who are paying attention to this stuff. And it makes for very realistic spaces that recede into the distance, spaces that are consistent architecturally and spatially as they recede back all the way to the horizon line. Let's go forward here. So here's the idea of single point linear perspective. We've got the horizon line established in the painting, and we're going to paint some kind of an object, and we decide where that object is. If it is floating up above our eyes and floating up above our heads, then we can actually see the bottom of the object. It's above the horizon line. And this front surface of the object is parallel to the picture plane, and it's parallel to us. So it presents as a square because it's absolutely, in a parallel plane to us. But these other sides of it are understood to be parallel, have parallel edges, and it's understood to be a cube. But we line these things up on these lines of perspective here. They're actually called orthogonal lines. but orthogonal is too big of a word to use anymore. But lines of perspective, so that they follow the lines of perspective all the way to a vanishing point on the horizon line. And that gives you a very consistent way of observing that object. And so that gives us a sense of spatial relationships that makes sense, and that is rational and logical. Okay, you can do 2-point linear perspective. If you walk around to the corner of an object, it can have 2 points of linear perspective. So I'm looking at the corner of the object, the bow of a ship, the corner of a cube, something like that. This one happens to be below my eye level, so I can look down and see the top of the object because my eye level is up here, even with the horizon line. And the sides of the object all tend to be understood to be parallel to each other, and yet they all will converge to a point on the horizon line. And these sides over here will also converge towards this point on the horizon line, creating that illusionistic three-dimensional space. So that's how 2-point linear perspective works. I wonder if I've got an example, yay, of 2-point linear perspective. So if you're standing out in the middle of the crosswalk, out in the middle of an intersection, and looking at the buildings on a city block from the corner, all of the windows and edges of the buildings and doorways and sidewalk and everything will all participate in linear perspective because they're all understood to be parallel to each other and moving away from us and moving towards a point on the horizon line. And so they can be drawn or painted like this. And same with the other ones, go in the opposite direction. All of everything, they may not be even with each other because buildings are different heights and everything, but the edges of windows will be on an orthogonal, on a perspective line that all goes back to a vanishing point on the horizon line. Same with the sidewalk, same with the doors, same with the ground floor details. All of that will participate within those rules. So there are actual rules that we can use. Did I really do that? Yes, I did. Okay. You guys have to move yet again. So there's also 3-point linear perspective. In the 20th and 21st century, when we started to get really, really tall buildings like skyscrapers, rocket ships, things like that, we had to start paying attention to a third axis, a third vanishing point. This would be the vertical vanishing point. And down here, the vertical vanishing point is off the paper down here at the bottom, so that when we're looking at this cube from up above and our horizon line is way up above the cube, we've got our usual 2 vanishing points on the horizon line. And then if there's a vertical axis that this 3-dimensional solid is on, we would have a vertical vanishing point that would be an extension of the center of the axis for a third axis, a third vanishing point, either going down or extending up in the composition. So it's very hard to tell here, but that makes these vertical edges somewhat converging towards a point on the vertical vanishing point. So this would be the actual way that you would observe a 3-dimensional object if you were really paying attention even to the vertical idea of converging vertical lines towards a vertical vanishing point. And so when you're building a skyscraper as a drawing or a painting or something, we've got a vanishing point somewhere off here, off the paper, where all of these lines will converge to the left. There would be another vanishing point, probably somewhere way off the right edge of the paper, where all of these horizontal lines would all converge on the same vanishing point. And then if you go vertically up to the top of the building and off the paper, there would also be a third vanishing point, a vertical vanishing point up there, where all of these lines would converge. And so that gives you a very dramatic way of showing huge vertical things in linear perspective as well. And it can be very exciting when you're designing buildings, when you're illustrating buildings, rocket ships, things that are super long, that they can have this third way of exploring a linear perspective. So that is pretty much it for linear perspective. Yeah, there's linear perspective in all of these paintings, but I'm done with that. So, and you are too. So atmospheric perspective is just things get really dull as you plunge into the background, and things are super contrasty and detailed when they're really up close. And then linear perspective deals with things that converge to points on the vanishing, on the horizon line, vanishing points on the horizon line. And that's all we got. So let's see. I'm going to stop the share, come back to you guys. What I wanted to do for the rest of the day is continue painting if you guys are painting. And if you are done painting, then congratulations. Thank you very much for being done painting. Please photograph and upload to coursework your finished painting so that we have something to critique on Friday. I'm going to open the quiz just excuse me, very soon, because several students want to leave by this weekend. They don't want to be here during finals week next week, so they want to take the quiz. They want to take their final before they leave. The final will be open from today, Wednesday, until next Wednesday, when it's our actual final exam day scheduled. You don't have to show up for our final exam day. You're sure welcome to come if you want to talk about, things, your grade, advising. If you want to talk about maybe considering becoming an artist or a designer, and you're wondering about what that career pathway might look like, or what colleges or universities you might want to go to for certain degrees and stuff, I'm always available for that kind of stuff. I'm contractually obligated to be here on Wednesday at 1 o'clock for our final exam. And so I'm happy to meet with anybody who shows up. And if you don't show up, it's not a required day. Just go ahead and take your final online, and we are good to go. Do you guys have any questions for me before we wrap this up for today? I'm happy to answer anybody's questions or concerns. There's no such thing as a dumb question. I'm happy to hear it. I see lots of people in the classroom are already done with their painting, and they're just waiting to get out of here. So I'm going to turn them loose pretty soon. Anything from the online audience? Anything for the good of the order from the folks online? Okay, please finish up your paintings if you're working on them, and photograph them and upload them. I will get that quiz open for you online, and that's the last thing that we're going to do, except for a critique session on this coming Friday. We're going to meet at the regularly scheduled time to critique our subjective color paintings. So thank you guys very much for coming today. And oh, there's something in the chat. Ah, Fritz, did you see me? Loey, I see you. I'm going to make sure that you get your participation points for being here. Thank you very much. All right. I'll see you guys on Friday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.